Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We have an awesome show for you today. We're going to get right to some meat and potatoes enthusiast stuff. We're going to talk about rumors about the Corvette SUV and rumors about, well, basically kind of an SUV sort of thing version of the Mustang. Car and Driver has, they've thrown some logs onto the rumor fire. Let's put it that way for both of these iconic American sports cars. So with that, I'll bring in Associate Editor Byron Hurd. What's going on, dude?
Hey, enjoying this fresh actual spring. Now that it seems like we had like a false spring and then kind of a little fresh hit of winter, and now it seems like maybe this is the real thing. So I'm feeling encouraged.
It feels like actual spring. I just took the dog for a walk, crystal clear, blue sky, golden retriever at a park. It's perfect. Let me put it that way. But yeah, I mean, to your point, it snowed the other day. Like 3 days ago, I golfed and we were playing like outside of the sprinklers. So it's really been all over the place with this weather, but that's okay. So, yeah, a couple other things we got going on here. We will try to spend some money, not exactly your money. We're going to talk about the end of the line for the Kia Stinger. I can't believe it's finally done. Got a bunch of reveals this week we'll talk about. And you had some fun driving not only your 2011 Jeep Wrangler, but a bunch of Jeeps out at the Easter Jeep Safari. So it's been a minute. Been meaning to talk about that for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. And here we finally are. So, yeah, it's good weather, some cool cars. I think it's just getting to be that time of the year when you can really enjoy being a car enthusiast. I went to a Cars and Coffee on Saturday when it hit like 84, 85 or something. Just felt like the middle of July. So many cool cars there. And it feels like it's that time of year. Yeah. I will say this, Cars and Coffee in Detroit, in Metro Detroit, are very competitive. I had to street park my Bentley Bentayga, which comes in at like at least $250. I don't have the Monroney in front of me, but I had to put that like down the block, just like it was, you know, a rental Chevy Cruze or something. But there was a 61 Maserati there. There was a Ferrari Dino. For those of you listening, you probably know of like the cult kind of favorite. Past Diners, Cars and Coffee, Saturday mornings in Metro Detroit. But yeah, it was pretty wild this weekend. So
good times.
All right. So Mustang. This is an interesting kind of look ahead piece from Car and Driver. Definitely want to give credit where credit's due. They wrote this a couple days ago. It's about a Mustang Raptor. This is one of their Cars Worth Waiting For's section. They got kind of a cool illustration on there. And this is sort of in the line of the like the Sterrato from Lamborghini. And having seen that just a couple weeks ago in New York, I was really taken by it. And then I, of course, we all check out Car and Driver. I saw their story. I thought, well, geez, Mustang should probably do this. I think it's, as you look at the end of the line for like the current generation and generations of Mustang as we know it, I think this is a very natural evolution. It'd be totally different. It would be like an iconic sort of cult hit, if you will. And I mean, if Lambo could do it, I think Ford could do it. And Ford already has all of the great Raptor tech. So yeah, I think they should. What do you think of this thing?
I think it's interesting. I mean, if this is what we're gonna do to have fun with Mustangs, then I'm all for it. Like, fun cars are fun cars, whether it's like 911 Dakar or something like that, where it's maybe not the traditional way you're supposed to do the fast version of a given thing, but I mean, it's certainly fascinating. And if they can pull it off and it's a competent holistic package, then I'm all for it. It may not necessarily be my cup of tea, but it certainly sounds like it could be pretty badass, which I'm sure is really the point. Whatever makes headlines and sells Mustangs and whatever else they want to sell. So
yeah. I think it's, I actually tend to think the body style of the Mustang could actually really lend it to it, to be honest. I think not every single sports car would fit. It's kind of like a off-road truck, but I think the Mustang works, I mean.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, especially like the rear end, like the fenders of it are almost kind of made for something like this. Like when you look at the rendering that Car and Driver did, just it looks like a Mustang, which, not anything like this that gets thrown out there as kind of like a design study or, a kind of make it up to match what we think it's going to be kind of rendering. It actually pulls that off, but it does actually look like a convincing production off-road Mustang.
Yeah. So we will have a story up by the time you listen to this with kind of our take on it. So definitely check that out. Shifting gears over to Corvette. This is another car driver sort of look ahead. I like looking at, as an enthusiast, I think Car Driver and Automotive News do a really good job of trying to see into the future, if you will, with their like sort of future product issues. And this is another one about the Corvette SUV, which we've all heard about. The electric Corvette is already here, the E-Ray. The first one just sold for like $1.1 million last weekend. It's interesting because I was on LinkedIn over the weekend. It's actually, to me, it's almost like the new Facebook for like work stuff. It's interesting. But Mark Royce, who's the president of General Motors, is pretty active on that platform. Seems to be a place we've all ended up with Twitter and Facebook and other things going other ways. Let's put it that way. He actually kind of threw some shade at it. He was like, yeah, I don't know about this one. I don't have his response exactly in front of me, but it was sort of a clap back. Like, I don't know, slow your roll there, car driver. And he would know, but at the same time, you never know. Sometimes executives like to say, well, that's not it. But it's like, they're pretty close. They're closer than you want to admit. I would bet you a box of donuts that Corvette does an SUV sooner rather than later in some form. I don't actually really like their illustration. Like, no offense. I just don't think that's quite how it's going to look, in my opinion. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, it would definitely make it a valuable addition to the lineup. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, the form that it's going to take is really the key, right? Like, I see this doing well. Honestly, if it leans kind of more toward what they suggested for the Mustang, where it's still kind of a coupe, but like a lifted off-roady coupe,
Yeah.
And the thing with Corvette is that it's too dedicated of a sports car,
Yes.
I think, to really lean too far toward 4x4. So it's going to be an on-road performance machine, right? Like with Mustang, it's like, yeah, they're a little rough and ready, It's the kind of thing where you could buy somebody kind of building their own version, so why shouldn't Ford?
Mm-hmm.
But with Corvette, like apart from like the weird little like go-karts we see people make out of like busted old C4 and C5 Corvettes to take to autocrosses and stuff like that, it's not the kind of thing where you think, oh, this is a car that needs to be like a dune buggy style performance vehicle. So if it's going to be a performance SUV, I'm assuming we're talking near slick tires, made for the road, going after like, Porsche type stuff and that kind of thing, and not something that would play in the same space as like the 911 Dakar or this hypothetical Mustang. But I mean, it's an interesting idea, and I can understand why everybody wants to do this kind of thing. Like, they want to try and find ways to transition their performance brands away from what they've traditionally done. But at the same time, there's still a demand for what they've traditionally done. You don't want to water that down too much. So
I think the Corvette's a little bit of a unique case in the fact that if you look at like what Porsche, Ferrari, Lambo have done, they've always had new nameplates for their SUVs or their crossovers. Like, there is no 911 SUV. So I think you want to be kind of careful if you're going to make the Corvette have a body style that really does diverge from historically what it's been. Like a 911 SUV, a lot of people wouldn't like that. I think you got to protect your icon. We'll see. I mean, it's the Mustang Mach-E has worked as a crossover better than I would have thought. Frankly, I think they just did it and lived with the fallout, and the fallout wasn't that bad. So, I mean, I think that's actually a pretty good test case for how you could try to swing it. But we'll see. I mean, the other thing too, though, is the Corvette. Now there's an electric version of it, and it is this high performance thing, whereas pony cars, you could argue that segment may not have as long to live. Whereas I think there's always going to be a segment for like high-end, powerful, expensive sports cars, which the Corvette does compete on a world-class level. So that's quite the rumor. Let's put it that way. Have some fun with that. But I guess we'll bring things back into the present day and talk about the Stinger. They're putting out a sort of end-of-life model to send the car outright. This was always a very impressive, I think, addition to the Kia lineup. They did go with a rear-wheel drive V8 sports sedan at a time when nobody was doing that. They like were you want to talk about coming late to the party. Like you are closing down the bar, setting the smoke alarms, and Kia's like knocking on the door saying, hey, let's do shots. And and they went big too, I mean, you could get all-wheel drive. There were a number of different powertrains. I thought it looked pretty good. We had a long-termer for a year and liked it. It didn't get as much use as I thought it would have in some ways, but we definitely still liked it for what it was. I mean, just as a guy who likes rear-wheel drive cars, sedans, sorry to see it go. Not at all shocked because we've known it's going away. If you like the Stinger, this is kind of a nice way to, try something different. The Stinger, I think, is very competitive with the Charger and 300. If you're not a Mopar person, you might look at this and think, hey, I like how that looks. I want that. So, I don't know. Do you have any Stinger memories?
Yeah, I was on the launch for that car, and so I remember driving the first couple of variants that they came out with, and liking it quite a bit. I actually haven't driven one in several years, but I mean, it was really good, and Kia kind of. It's one of those cases, I think, where you have engineers kind of calling the bluff of so-called consumers, like people who say, "Oh, if you build a car like this, I'll buy it," and then they build it, and look what happens. And the Stinger was kind of like the bluff to all the enthusiasts who said, well, if Dodge built a lighter Charger that was a little bit smaller and had, more efficient engines, I would totally go buy one, even if it still had an automatic. And Kia said, here you go. And suddenly nobody showed up. So this happens fairly frequently. And honestly, I feel like half the time it happens, it's usually GM that it happens to. Mm-hmm. So for once seeing it happen to another manufacturer is kind of novel just by itself. But yeah, this one's kind of a shame. And I would like to see Stinger come back. And I honestly think the way they positioned it could be revived. I mean, just leaning back into the conversation we were just in, you lifted 1.5 inches. It was already a lift back. So, you just kind of like lean into the proportions a little bit with the style, and you probably wouldn't even have to make it that much taller to pull it off as like a, crossover coupe type thing. So, that's on the table, I guess, if they think there's enough equity left in it to actually, try, which I don't see them doing in any kind of hurry with electrification being the big push right now. But it's kind of a shame. And I mean, it would be great to see it come back even on an electric car. Like it was, it was an interesting and fun car. And an underrated car. It's kind of a shame it's going away, but that's kind of that's the times we live in, right?
Yeah, I mean it was frankly I loved it, but it was outdated the minute it became a thing, So I mean, they did a good job of living up to the promise of exactly what they said they were going to do. I remember they showed the concept. I think it was Detroit. This shows you how long ago. It wasn't even the biggest reveal of that auto show in Detroit. It was just like, oh yeah, there's Kia's concept. It's like it was like later in the day. It wasn't even that big a deal compared to whatever else was shown that year. But it was a great concept, is my point. And then they lived up to it. They executed. It was a fun car to drive. But there's other fish to fry. So, all right. So that's kind of our rumors and rear-wheel drive opening. Let's talk about some actual news, things that are pretty new this week. Just kind of run through these. There were a bunch of reveals in the last, probably 10 days. I mean, there was like an auto show 2 weeks ago. It seems like, I don't know, maybe they could have revealed some of these cars there. Yeah, might have been useful. People might have cared. I digress. But there's a lot of stuff here. And the Shanghai Motor Show is also this week too, if you're listening to it. So not a ton of like implications for the United States, but some interesting stuff. Check out our coverage. Anyways, Polestar 4 was revealed this week. It's kind of like this lifted fastback sort of thing. Grows the Polestar lineup. It doesn't exactly have a traditional rear window, which is super weird. Stylistically, it looks great. It may be one of the best looking Polestars yet, so to speak. And we've seen a few of them now. Maybe not as good as the Polestar 1, which was, the Grand Touring, the OG of, whatever, the whole brand. But I like this one. I'm impressed with it.
I like the look of it, but I am not thrilled with this no rear window thing.
Okay.
Even if it's an abbreviated rear window, or we're not calling it a rear window because it's just like a mail slot or whatever, like whatever manufacturers are going to try to do with this kind of like, creeping away the rear window thing, I'm not here for it at all. That just, it kind of instills almost claustrophobia in me to just think about not having visibility out of the rear without digital aid. That's, ambitious, and I understand like the applications for camera technology and display technology for things like this, but when it comes to just basic outward visibility, I don't really think there's any way to beat a good old-fashioned window.
Yeah, fair enough. For what it's worth, I didn't say I didn't like the lack of window. I just like the general design, the aesthetics. I don't think that's
and I'm with you there. Idea. Yeah. It's like I'd be happy to look at it and happy to take it for a spin, but you certainly won't catch me buying one. I'm going to draw the line at rear window. I need it to stay.
You think that's not an unreasonable place to draw the line either. Like, wait a minute.
Right?
This car doesn't have a rear window. Hello.
Yeah. And I drove a Challenger for several years, so I value rearward visibility quite a bit. And yeah, that's something that I'm gonna put my foot down.
All right, let's talk about news out of Buick, which we don't often do. The Invista is officially a thing. This one kind of blew up a little bit on social media. People were, I think, a little surprised at how good it looks. The price they're coming in hot on the price. I think generally Buick doesn't go totally on price. They're coming in hard, less than 24,000. So, check out the story. News editor Joel Stocksdale wrote it up. You got to look at the pictures. I could be crazy, but I thought I saw one of these on the road the other day. I was like just walking through the park with, again, the aforementioned Golden Retriever. And I was like, wow, that's like the new Buick logo. Okay, that looks pretty good. What the hell is that thing? It didn't fit with what I was thinking of Buicks. So of course the whole "that's a Buick," catchphrase is screaming. But I kept going. I just figured it was something else, like maybe an Envision or something. But I mean, when I look at these pictures, I'm like that's what I saw. I don't know though.
Hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, but I like it. I think this is another. I mean, I guess I'm 2 for 2 at designs I like. They grabbed it sort of from, it was the Wildcat concept from a while ago. And I think that's a good move. Buick's done, with fewer mouths to feed at General Motors. They've condensed brands in the last, obviously, decade. It feels like they're kind of really coming at you with some pretty solid designs, and Buick, I think, has been a benefit of that. So,
yeah, I agree. I think this looks really good too. I'm not super thrilled about the rear, like the kind of swoopy greenhouse termination, the kind of almost floating look to it in the rear quarter. But honestly, like if this thing were 2 inches lower on, like just drop the stance a little bit, I think it would be crazy hot. Like it's a good looking little CUV.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's crossover coupe. And that makes a ton of sense for Buick too, because you've already got the GMC brand, which is trucks and SUVs, crossovers. General Motors can kind of do some things with Buick, which ostensibly probably doesn't need crossovers. That's not true anymore, but there was a time when they were positioning GMC as SUVs and trucks, Buick as like the complementary, for a minute, it was like European sports sedan brand. That wouldn't make any sense in this day and age. But crossover coupes, I think that is a good market for Buick, place to be. All right, then there's VW's flagship, the ID7. We've seen this. Our European correspondent, Ronan Glan, who you've worked with at different points, has already driven it. So then naturally they would do another reveal, this time in New York, oddly enough, a week after the New York Auto Show. I mean, if you're the New York Auto Show, what are you thinking when VW reveals a car in New York, like literally 48 hours after the public days of your show end? Like, I don't know. Like, if that doesn't sort of be the kick in the teeth as far as auto shows, I don't know what does. It's timed with, I believe, the Shanghai Motor Show. But yeah, man. So again, I don't quite love this one as much, I guess. There's 3 different designs here. They're not related to each other other than we're just all talking to them. So comparisons are like relative. I don't know. I tend to like it. To me, it looks like a longer, lower ID4. And I think the ID4 looks better as a crossover than it does as this kind of like sedan. It's tripping out of my mouth. It's a sedan. So
yeah. And honestly, like the wagon version of this that we've seen like renderings of and stuff for Europe, I think there might even be like an actual like production wagon out there somewhere. But
Yeah.
I think it wears it a little more elegantly just because the sedan looks so long. Like
Yep.
that the scrunched greenhouse and the kind of punched out front and rear makes it look really, really big. Like we're talking like minivan big, which I don't know that that's necessarily the comparison they were hoping for, but
Yeah.
it looks like a lot of car. And it honestly, I think it looked better. I saw the prototype of this in LA at a preview event that we weren't allowed to talk about for a while, but they had it covered in that electrochromatic paint, which covered up the greenhouse lines and everything. And it made the car look a little bit taller and not quite as long. So I think part of it is we're being kind of ruined by the monotone color of these. Like maybe once we start to see them in black and some other darker colors, it'll work a little bit better.
Yeah.
But especially like the white and black two-tone that they're using on the concept photos really makes it look ungainly to me. I'm not a fan.
I mean, this is probably not going to be a huge volume play in the United States. Like they are timing it. You know, I do rag on the New York like reveal with the auto show thing, but it's going to launch in China and Europe first, and that's where there is still some critical mass for sedans. That's where Volkswagen, of course, is based. Speaking of Europe specifically. And, you did have the auto show this year in China that they're trying to capitalize on. So, to be a little more specific, that's what they're doing. But part of me just thinks this is a Phaeton, like you remember that thing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, poor Phaeton.
We'll leave it there. We'll leave it there. New Cayenne, some critical updates for the 2024 model year. Speaking of just sports car brands with SUVs, I mean, this is one of the original ones, the OG. Porsche rolled out the Cayenne 20 some years ago. Now it's basically keeps them alive in many ways. Yeah, I mean, this is just another, if you're a Cayenne buyer for 2024, it's going to be a little bit better for you.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. This one's another one that I'm kind of on the fence about, honestly. Like, I realize it wasn't as significant of a styling update as it could have been, but I think the coupe somehow got better, which and I wasn't a huge fan of the way the Cayenne coupe looked, and the standard one got worse. It's hard to say. It's hard to tell with some of these changes, but yeah, I mean, it could be a lot worse. So
the too long, well, please read actually is more power and more screens. That's our headline. So that's kind of what you need to know, and that's seems to be where luxury brands are going for the next few years until they get to be electric, which is more power and more screens, sometimes more design, styled up design, but seems to be what they're doing. So, cool. And then, of course, the Lincoln Nautilus. Wow, Buick and Lincoln in the same segment. I can hardly contain it, but it's a pretty important reveal for Lincoln. Naturally, it goes into a segment that is definitely critical. We've already got pricing. It starts at just under 52 grand. So that is just out as of today. That's kind of a good move. I've been kind of ragging on automakers' launch strategies, but they get it out there and then they get the pricing right after it. So smart there. There's a configurator too. This also has a pretty strong tie-in to what's going on in China. It's going to be built in China for starters. So I imagine there's some mention of this at that motor show as well. But I mean, it's coming here. There's a new hybrid powertrain. If you look at it, it looks a little sleeker. In some ways, I almost think it's less distinctive than it was before, a little cleaner. But when I look at it, it's almost like, I mean, it's got some hallmarks, like the headlights, the taillights, the grille. But just from a side, it's like it could be a Land Rover, it could be a Hyundai, it could be anything in between. So, yeah, that's the Nautilus.
I like it.
You like it?
I like it. Yeah, I think that the black label, especially with that interior, looks really, really good. I dig that a lot. I think they did a good job with that one.
All right. Sounds good. So I'm kind of 2-2, and I think you're like 3-1 as far as likes for this quasi auto show week.
It's not bad.
Yeah. All right. That's good. So that's what's going on. Let's talk about what we've been driving. You went out to Moab and drove some of the concepts, and you drove the 20th anniversary Wrangler Rubicon. That's kind of cool too. Where do you want to start? You were out there. What do you think?
Well, let's start with, I think, the 20th anniversary Rubicon, just because it's, immediately available and real, as opposed to most of the other things I saw out there. And I mean, the real news there is it's stickers and paint and interior for the most part, and apart from that, it's effectively just you check every box on a Wrangler Rubicon, and this is what you get. So effectively, you could call it like not a popular equipment package, but an all-in equipment package with the specialty stuff, just to kind of to make it stand out a little bit. But you do get a 1/2 inch of suspension lift out of these. So they just kind of threw that in there, kind of in the margins, to be like, oh, and by the way, it has amazing, new specs, approach, departure, and breakover angle are all slightly improved, ride height's improved, water 40's improved, ever so very slightly, which is really just one-upmanship with Ford and the Bronco. It's just, trying every time someone does another special edition, they got to find another stat where they can get ahead of the other guy, which is great. This is what competition does. This is why having the Bronco back is great news for Jeep people. Like, there's no downside to this, except the price, I guess. I mean, you're looking at, $70,000 to get into a 4xe and $90,000 to get into a 392. And then if you want the AEV level 2, which actually does get you significantly more ground clearance and beefed up rock guards and all sorts of stuff like that, then you're spending $90,000 on a 4xe and 110 or so on a 392. So the AEV level 2 package for the anniversary edition is the most capable Jeep Wrangler you can buy in a showroom, but you will pay for it. And we were actually talking about this on the drive, some of the other folks who were there, fellow enthusiasts and Jeepers, and just talking about, like, can you build a truck that can do this for less money? And the answer is probably no. But you could probably build a truck that will suit your personal needs for a heck of a lot less money, especially if you start with the updated Willys package, which for this year gets the shortened fenders so you can fit bigger wheels under it. It's already taller, so it's in a good position to be the canvas for the enthusiast who wants to build their own Rubicon instead of just buying one from the factory. And of course, you can still get regular Rubicons. It's not like they went anywhere. But it's impressive, but is it $113,000 impressive? That's an individual choice. I mean, that's Ram TRX money, that's Raptor R money. Like, you can get a whole lot of truck, a whole lot of SUV for 6 figures these days. So, I mean, literally any half ton you wanted, you could get for 6 figures, because that's right at the top of the price range. So it's a tough buy for people who aren't Jeepers, but if you just have to have the best Jeep Wrangler that money can buy, and you don't want to mess with your warranty, then hey, there you go. You got 2 options right there. We also got to preview the 2024s by literally sneaking over and looking at them, because they were photographing them while we were there. So we just got kind of a quick sneak glance at those. Nothing really to report there apart from what you've seen in the news. We'll have to actually see how they drive and what the changes do for them. And then the concepts, the ones that were actually there to be driven, the 78 Cherokee was an absolute blast. I mean, it was literally just a Wrangler 4xe 4-door that had a 78 Craigslist Cherokee grafted on top of it, effectively. Like, there were parts of the Cherokee they couldn't even salvage and had to chuck. They took like little pieces of the tailgate, because that was all that wasn't rusted, and they formed them in with some other parts to actually just make it work. Lots of carbon fiber. They hired a street artist to do a mural for the interior of the roof. Very cool car. But the 2 real headliners were the 392 Scrambler, which was basically a 4-door Wrangler chopped down to 2 doors. Still has the 392 V8 and an air suspension on it, so you can pretty much go over anything in that car, and it makes wonderful noises. In fact, calling it a car is unfair. It's basically just a dune buggy. A concept they're not going to build, of course, because you can't sell things like that in a showroom. But a really cool one to drive, and its twin was the Magneto 3.0, which is Jeep's electric prototype that they've been working on for 3 years. Well, they've been working on it longer than that, but they've shown us a new version for each of the past 3 times we've been to Easter Jeep Safari with them, which is a careful way to word it, given that the pandemic happened in the middle there. Mm-hmm. But it started out as being about as powerful as a Pentastar V6 Wrangler, and now it makes 650 horsepower. It needs a beefed up Hellcat transmission just to get the torque to the ground, and that's a manual transmission, which is really not functional in a car like that, because you basically pick any gear you want and go. You don't need to use the clutch really, except to change gears. You don't need it to start off. It's really the easiest way in the world to learn how to drive a manual transmission, only you don't even have to. So, and they're never going to build it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. That's going to be replaced effectively by the Recon. So when the Recon becomes a production vehicle, that will be Jeep's electric off-road vehicle. And we should be seeing more on that later this year and into next when it's scheduled to actually hit showrooms. So got to play around with everything out there. The air suspension in a Wrangler is kind of a new innovation. And they're using aftermarket parts for now, but it's something they're kind of teasing out. And we were talking to some of the Jeep folks. The idea is that, this might be something that you get maybe in like an uprated like Sahara package or something like that for the kind of people who aren't going to off-road very often, because it's just another system that adds a lot of complexity, and like the Rubicon crowd doesn't really want air suspension. I mean, it might be nice to be able to like crawl under a branch that you can't normally crawl under, or ford water that you can't normally ford, because you can actually adjust your ride height a little bit, but it's like the payoff is really not worth the penalty, because if that system breaks on you when you're out in the sticks, you're stuck, especially if it fails down and you're basically just beached on a rock somewhere in the desert and they can't get you out. So that was Easter Jeep Safari. We got to play with a little bit of everything. The AEV level 2 20th anniversary Rubicons are legit, but you'll pay for them.
Okay. Yeah, that's about what I expected. Every year it seems like at Moab, they have some sort of interesting take on, usually the past, and also what, kind of a peek ahead of what they're going to do. So, it's interesting now that we've had off-roaders, if you will, like in the modern era for a while. They're starting to get old. The 20th anniversary Rubicon. I was just talking to senior editor for all things electric, John Snyder, about the 40th anniversary 4Runner. And people are really kind of like enjoying the paint and sticker jobs. Like they just, they're expensive, but they capture that look and that feel. And, it kind of sounds like that's what the Wrangler 20th does. I would like to drive that one this summer. I think that would be a lot of fun just to like have that vibe on a hot summer week.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, that's convertible life and the benefits of 4x4s. You can't really go wrong with it. And it was interesting while we were there too. There was an individual not affiliated with the program at all who was cruising the trails in their original 03 Wrangler Rubicon. And of course, all the Jeep engineers were going over to chat with them. And, there was like, oh, look, here's the new one and all that. But it was really fascinating to look at the 2003 Rubicon next to a brand new one, because the original Rubicon was, 2-door, lifted a little bit. But I mean, by today's standards, doesn't really look like much. And you have to consider that in, the 20 years since Rubicon is launched, we have kind of gone away from the original formula for off-road, which was, as tall as you can get away with, but on the shortest wheelbase possible, which is terrible for on-road stability, but it's fantastic for rock crawling. And Jim Morrison was telling us, Jim from Jeep was telling us that the new philosophy is essentially still get the biggest tires you can underneath those fenders, but you can add wheelbase to do it. So now we have these big, longer, more comfortable, more stable off-road vehicles that still manage to be even more capable than the smaller rigs from just 10, 20 years ago. So it's an interesting kind of shift in the industry, and a lot of it is just brought on by like the friendliness toward SUVs that the consumers have shown over the last decade and a half or two. But we're a lot more welcoming and a lot more willing to consider things that 20 years ago would have been outrageous to us. So we've kind of crept into this new kind of era of what makes a good off-roader. And it'll be interesting to see how that translates to electrification, because we have all the torque we need in the world now to drive huge ass tires. So, you can put 40-inch tires underneath the fenders of a modern car if you're putting electric motors in it, because they can actually turn them. So it's going to be interesting to see what electrification does for 4x4s over the next 10 to 20 years, I guess. We'll just, we'll do it all over again and see what happens.
Yeah, no, it's, you look at brands like, VW with the Scout brand,
Yep.
Things like that are going to really shake this up. And that also means, transitions for the Bronco and the Wrangler. And I think now would be a good time for General Motors to get into it. They could skip the internal combustion and go straight electric. So we actually, you and I had lunch with some people from Toyota. That was cool earlier this week. And I was under the impression you were driving this kind of like bedraggled, wrecked old Wrangler. And you rolled up in this 2011 Wrangler. I'm like, lovely tan paint and just, nice 10-year-old-ish Jeep. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So I guess I didn't know you had that. Yeah, how's that one going? I think people like to hear about what we're driving. And that's a nice vintage of Jeep.
It's okay. I mean, so its model year makes it kind of I don't know, a bit of a cast off, I suppose, because it has the old 3.8 liter minivan engine in it. And I mean, of course, no one calls it minivan engine to be kind. So that's kind of what you deal with. And also, so my father originally purchased it new. And when he bought his JL, the current one, in 2018, he offered the old one to me. And I, of course, never turned down a Wrangler. This is the second time I've done this with him. He buys a new Wrangler, and I basically buy his old one. So it works out for me because I get cheap Wranglers that I get to do whatever I want with. And it works out for him because he gets a brand new one to, show off every time I come around and realize how old and crappy mine is. But the Sport JK's held up pretty well. I mean, it's got some issues here and there, but for the most part, it's a pretty active winter beater for me. And it's about to come off the Nokian Outpost AT tires that they loaned us for that one, which will have another snow update coming here pretty soon. Now that we're out of snow season, that'll be the last one until we get some more. But it's a punchy little runabout that has been fairly reliable for me. Unfortunately, those early JK, they don't have the best durability reputation.
Yeah.
And we have seen some of the issues with. I think my father had to replace the brakes twice for issues, not for wear, but for problems. And they're acting up again for me. And I'm in the process of replacing them. And we're talking like, replacing the calipers entirely or rebuilding them, whichever is more convenient. So far, it's just been replaced because they've been cheap. But, I'm at under 55,000 miles and it's on its third brake rebuild, which is just not Stedling. I mean, it could be worse. And this is a vehicle that spent most of its life kept outside until my folks moved to New Mexico. It was never garaged or anything like that. So, that's tough on a car, especially if it's a winter beater that's going to see nothing but, salt and snow and stuff like that for half the year. And then the occasional top-down cruise in the summer. So it's, it lives a pretty easy life, but it gives me enough trouble to keep me on my toes anyway.
That sounds odd. The brake stuff. That's I don't know what to say about that.
It's a common issue with the JKs. They've got some others too. And also just when you drive a new Jeep, because we only get a new Jeep once a decade, a new Wrangler that is, the new ones always feel like luxury vehicles compared to the old ones. And the JL does feel much, much, much nicer. So my father went from a two-door JK to a two-door JL. And when I go visit him, he also went to an automatic. And that 8-speed's pretty solid. The 6-speed manual in my JK is awful. I compared it to, stirring a bucket of rocks. And I've offered several people on staff, I'm like, if you want to know what a truly bad manual transmission feels like, borrow the Jeep. You take it around the block, you'll understand. It doesn't take much. And honestly, like that's something that has always been a thing though. It's like the refinement in a Wrangler was never a priority. And it's only in, somewhat recently with, Sahara and some of them getting more expensive and appealing to a broader audience that creature comforts have really mattered. But it's not a car you buy because you want to be coddled. It's a car you buy because you either just like the idea of a convertible 4x4 or because you want to take it off-roading. So you have to live with the drawbacks, and unfortunately a two-door 10-year-old Wrangler has quite a few of them.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. It's funny. I went on the one of the updated Wrangler drives back. It was on the Rubicon in 2012, I guess it was. And I remember we were driving some of the older versions, and I was just like, wow, this is a pretty big step forward. Just what they do a little bit with like the interior and some of the refinements. And it's still relatively rough, but it's like, it's never more stark in that like the start of a new generation or even a refresh where you're like, oh, wow, this is what we were doing. And now this is what they're doing. Okay.
Yeah, but, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. That manual transmission. Yeah. God, I used to drive that thing at like the FCA and the Chrysler open houses that they used to do out at their proving grounds in Chelsea, Michigan. And it's fun because you can drive everything they make. And, I always wanted to be like, get behind the wheel of maybe like a stick shift Wrangler just to be like, oh, what's this like? Then I'd come through the press fleet. Like, all right, yeah, I remember what this is like. This isn't great. I'm going to go take the automatic and go off-roading or something, and
yeah. If I remember correctly, the 6-speed that's in the JK Wranglers was sourced from Mercedes from their commercial vans. So it would have been like the Sprinter manual transmission in Europe. and probably was paired to, a little diesel of some kind, and probably the 5-cylinder diesel that we saw here. So, designed for torque, which is great because, they are, as far as I know, they're pretty bulletproof. They're just miserable to drive. There's no lockout really on reverse. So when you're cruising down the highway going from 5th to 6th, which I have to do a lot because I have the really tall fuel economy gears in mine because my father's cheap. Thanks, Dad. You can accidentally bump reverse and it just grinds at you. And it's really easy to do. There's really no lockout. There's nothing even really kind of nudging you in the right direction. Your muscle memory has to do all of it. So if you're tired, if you're just not paying attention, it's easy to bounce it off reverse trying to shift into top gear, which is just ridiculous. But I mean, it's a Jeep and a 10-year-old one. So
yeah. First time I did the Rubicon, I did it in a 4-door Wrangler. It was green with the stick shift, and that was a lot of work. Let's put it that way. It was a lot of work. It was big. It was, challenging to get through all those rocks. It was a little bit like being in a car crash for about 13 hours. Got out of that, and you're ready to have a drink around the campfire. But it was awesome. Great memory. So yeah. Speaking of memories, it's the Mustang's 59th birthday. It's not really a real milestone, but I don't know. It seems like the Mustang's really top of mind these days. Happy birthday, Mustang. Do you have any Mustang really memorable experiences?
I've got a few. I owned a 2015 GT for a couple of years and tracked and autocrossed that a little bit. That was an absolutely wonderful car. I actually thought I was going to keep that car forever until I banged it up at some point. So that was the beginning of the end of Mustang ownership for me. And it's one of those cars where I always look back and go, I think one day I'll probably end up with another one again.
Yeah.
But I think we were just having this conversation actually in Slack this morning, myself and Palmer and a couple others, just talking about the new Mustang and our favorite Mustangs, and looking back at that one. I think for S550 for the outgoing generation, the 2016 is probably my sweet spot because before they refreshed it, but after they updated Sync, if I'm remembering the model year right, it might be 17, but either way, because the 2015 was the first year, that's the one I had, and it still had the old version of Sync, and it was fine. But if you get into a 16, it's like the kind of the primo spot before you get into the really aggressive price creep and everything like that we started to see over the last few years. So it's kind of the last affordable Mustang GT, and one that I'll forever be a fan of.
Yeah. I mean, since they've gone retro, it just seems like the car keeps getting better and better. Some people might say it's almost a bit too much, some of the variants and the styling, but I mean, that's up to you. If you don't want them, don't get them. I think it's still one of the best values you could get just for an enthusiast who wants to have fun. It's, V8 power, you can get stick shift. It looks like a Mustang, everything there. The Mach-E is, there for you too, if you want a very solid electric car. Man, I've had a lot of good memories with Mustangs, to be honest. The one that maybe stands out, this is just almost on a personal note. I remember driving my grandmother in a 2008 or 9 red convertible in the press fleet. I thought it was a big deal because it looked like a big deal car. Right one of those days where the fall is turning, but it's all bright. And she loved it. She must have been, what year was that? She was probably into her 90s, but more than happy to throw on an Irish sort of cloak and jump in the car, and away we went, and she had a great time, and I did too. That was a good era of Mustang, and it really has only gotten better, So I would like to own a Fox body Mustang at some point too in my future. I think they're still somewhat affordable. It's not really in my current situation. I don't have room for one. I definitely don't have the time to deal with it. But I don't know. That's, if I could blow $10,000 on a car, I think getting one with some miles on it that would be fun for a couple of summers, that would be cool. So
yeah, I'm with you there.
Cool. All right. Well, we've got a few more orders of business to take care of. One thing that I came across that was kind of cool this week, that if you like cars, a lot of people who like cars also like gear and watches. I listened to this podcast called The Gray NATO, and they did an auto episode this week. So if you search for it, I have no relationship. This is not an affiliate thing. I just thought it was cool. So if you like cars, you might want to listen to their automotive episode. I think they do a good job over there talking about dive watches, field watches, the kind of thing that you might wear when you're driving your sports car and you don't care if you smash it up. So the watch, that is, not the car. So I think it's a cool episode if you're interested. It's a cool podcast. So what, do you want to spend money or you want to talk beers? Your call, man.
I mean, both really, but
Okay.
we could probably spend money pretty quickly.
Let's do that. $15K to get on a rear wheel drive coupe or sedan. How are you spending your money?
So this would have been a lot easier like 3 years ago because I would have had a list and the things so I'm going to answer for myself first. This is a weird fetish car that I've wanted for a while, and I think I'm going to end up with one just to say I did it. And that's an old 3.8 liter Genesis coupe. Weird car. I know, they didn't take off, and it was for good reason. Honestly, like they're really fun to drive, but there are a lot of reasons why they're not great, like tuner or enthusiast platforms, and that's way too much to get into here. But it was a brand new car with brand new everything. It took a while for the aftermarket to like get its teeth into it, and I don't think it ever went very far, especially because it ceased to exist. But my backups to that would be Scion FRS. You can probably get one of those just under if you go with the early years. But I think the Subaru BRZs, just because the BRZ as a name still exists, have slightly higher resale value for some reason. Probably just search demand, because people don't think to search for Scion FRS because it's not a current car.
Yeah.
So use that to your advantage. I've seen them listed for like, $12,000, $13,000 with, you're going to get them with miles, but they'll be fine. I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, those good choices. I remember driving those Genesis coupes. They were a lot of fun. They were ahead of their time. Maybe not ahead of their time, but they were, when they came onto the market, they filled a void where there still were not that many like high performance or just sporty things for enthusiasts. We were still kind of getting out of that tail end of that 80s and 90s like malaise, if you will. That was a fun car. I had a great time with it. The Turbo 4 was a riot. Stick shift was pretty good. It looked good. I mean, Genesis, Hyundai, Kia, Genesis wasn't even its own brand at that point. They've kind of gone after enthusiasts, and that's a cool thing. I'll throw a couple things at the wall here. I'd say if you like the Charger or 300 or the Magnum or the Challenger, I guess, but I would probably think Charger or Magnum for this amount of money. See how much of it you could get. It's going to be used. It's going to probably be 10-ish years old. You could definitely get a V8 for that kind of money. So there's that option. Then in the back of my head, I was almost thinking of 20-year-old cars, but I didn't put that as a criteria here. And it tended to lean domestic. So the car in my head was actually the Pontiac G8 GT. You want a Pontiac, you want a rear-wheel drive V8 Pontiac, you can still get one. You're going to get a lot of miles. You're talking 6-figure miles. But it's a unique thing. It's a fun thing. It's not that much money to spend on a car that that's probably not going to hold up very long. It's not something you're going to keep in your garage, but you could be the guy who, drives it until maybe it goes to some high school kid or something, or college kid. But I thought they look cool.
Well, and if you want something like that, that's even more of a throwaway. I actually, just you mentioning that made me think of this. A couple weeks ago, I think I saw a used police issue Caprice.
Oh yeah.
So, an SS, but not an SS.
Yep.
For pennies. I mean, it was a V6, I'm pretty sure. I don't think it was one of the state highway patrol ones, which actually could be option with the LS3. I don't remember which one it was. But you could get a V8, I think, in the Pursuit models, but this wasn't one. And it was relatively cheap. Now, granted, when you're buying police surplus, there are a lot of things to consider. But I mean, the mileage and the wear, the hours on the powertrain are just kind of the tip of the iceberg or something like that. But I mean, for cheap, for something that theoretically should hold up pretty well considering its intended use, that could be a fun buy.
This is just fun rear-wheel drive cars is what we're kind of talking about here. Like if I want to spend more money, I'd go for an Impala SS from like 94 to 96. The Chevy SS is not bad too. I wouldn't mind owning one of those, but they're expensive.
Yes. Whew. Yeah, you're lucky if you can find one of those for under 40.
I don't think I'd pay 40 for one of those, would you? You might. You own a Cadillac Blackwing, so you might.
Honestly, like I thought about a used SS before the Blackwing, but it didn't. I know a lot of people think that the Blackwing should have come with a V8, the 4, but I don't know. That they're very different cars, and I didn't want another V8 at that point. So it's maybe.
Yeah, I hear you. There's other things ahead of it in the pecking order. If it was 20, I would be like 100%. But it's 40. Yeah. I mean, that's considering there's many drawbacks of that car that, I don't know. We'll see. I did see there is somebody at Cars and Coffee and like off of Woodward, if you will, that has one that has, I think it's Vauxhall badges on it. No, wait, that's not right. Maybe Holden badges. That's what I meant. And it's got to be he swapped out the badges. That's all I can think of what he did. But looks cool.
I think you can just swap the bumpers. Like you don't even have to be too picky about it. Like it's the paint finishes and everything. I'm pretty sure all the codes match. You can literally just pull bumper and ship it across the pond, and you're good to go.
There you go.
I got a nice Wave. I drove when the weather warmed up last week. I took the Blackwing to pick my partner up at the airport. When I was on my way to get her, I was at a stoplight, and somebody was coming the other way in a CTS wagon, one of the big CTS V wagons with drag tires on it, and I acknowledged him, and he waved back. And when the light turned green, he flew past me at full throttle. That was a lot of fun. It's springtime in the Detroit area is a great place to be if you like performance cars.
So after you've parked your car, you're relaxing, darkness is falling. What are you drinking in the spring?
So on my way back from the airport was my first beer run of the season. Okay. And actually, I went pretty simple. I found this is going to be completely nonsensical for the time of year, but I found an old Ohio brand that I liked, Rheingeist. They're based out of Cincy, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And I found they have a whole line of beers that are all like themed around reality, and they have like truth and things like that. So they have an Imperial IPA that I picked up that I'm a big fan of, and also just went with another of my go-tos, which are the Bell's Amber. So.
Nice. I had when I was in New York for the auto show, I had a Montauk IPA. This is let's see, what do they actually call it specifically? Wave Chaser IPA. So that's a really solid drink. There was like this random like beer cart, if you will, just out on the sidewalk. So I bought one and kind of sat at just these like kind of tables and chairs set up in the Flatiron District and really enjoyed it. It was good beer. Nice. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's available anywhere else but New York, but it's a good beer if you're in the Northeast and you want to try it. So yeah, good way to spend a nice spring evening. Let's put it that way. All right. We hope you're enjoying the podcast. And if you are, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get the show. Send us your Spend My Monies. That's podcast@autoblog.com. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next week.